Welcome to Rolling Into Your DMs, the show about the more subjective side of running Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop RPGs. We are your dungeon masters, a lifelong dungeoneer with more experience points than the rest of us put together, Chris.
All in pursuit of making those dummy-lich dreams come true.
A World Wide Web wizard who owns at least one mysterious orb and has a beard to match, Brian.
Yeah, sometimes the orb gets lost in the beard.
With an 18 in charisma, a 15 in intelligence, and straight 8s across the rest of the board, Kyle.
That is alarmingly accurate.
And I am Steve, a Pictomancer with a suspiciously large number of luck points.
Today's topic is going to be what level to start at and when. Kind of a, should you start at first level? Should you start at level 12? And when you should start at first level versus when you would have your party start at 12th level and the reasons for which you would choose either. So, does everyone want to begin by rolling initiative?
Hell yeah.
I mean, it's gonna happen.
Sounds good to me.
That's a 4.
I got a 9.
You know, last episode I got a nat 20, and this episode, poetically, I got a nat 1.
Huh.
Alright. Well, I got
Excellent.
a 19, so...
All right.
Let's start with reasons why we would begin our characters at level 1. And for me, in my experience as a DM, starting characters at level 1 is most beneficial to players who have never played Dungeons & Dragons before, particularly because it allows the person to become acquainted with the leveling system so that they are able to modify their character as they go and become kind of familiar with what abilities or weapons or whatever it is they want to use as they're playing, because I feel like sometimes you can start out and be like, yeah, I'm gonna be a fighter and I'm gonna be really into hitting things, but then as you play the campaign you're like, maybe I'm a fighter but I'm not so much into hitting things as I am into using my charisma to make other people hit things for me and inspiring my cohorts to do some awesome damage. And starting at level 1 lets you really get a feel for all that jazz.
Right.
I concur.
Who was next?
I believe it was Steve.
Oh, so I guess I kind of agree with you there in term, like, what does it mean to start at, like, level 1? In terms of, like, your progression into the story. Like, you cannot be a badass for your backstory at level 1. We've heard, or I have been in situations where I DM'd where there was someone that was a badass at a particular level, and whether it's a culmination of, like, it could be based on experience and that's what the level represents, or it's based on age or what have you. For people that are starting at level 1, maybe they're, like, stubborn, just hard-headed, but they can't do all the cool things that you think your character can do. Or, I mean, it might work out in your favor. It's a D20. You never really know with these things. But it's been my experience that your level and backstory is based on, or it equals out for both of those. So in my brain, when you're at level 1, everyone's at, like, not necessarily daycare, but that's, like, the first time they have even considered doing anything beyond their normal scope as a character. Like, if I were to DM in that campaign, pushing these characters along from the starting all the way up to, let's say, 5 or 10, enough time has passed or enough experience has happened where the players will start to know what their character is like and maybe add more quirks for their character that would make a lot more sense at a far greater level than it would be at level 1. Things like that. Interestingly enough, because I have experience outside of D&D, I did play GURPS, and that handles levels differently, in which there are no levels. You just get point total, and depending on what the game master or the DM would start their campaign as, they'll let you know what the overall point total of your character would be, and you can assign very specific things for your character that would make sense, but it would be very limited, especially if you're building off of something that's more of a 2-digit number, like 20 or whatnot. You're not going to have enough points to buy things that would make a lot of sense for your character to do. Rather, in D&D, you just start off as that class with specific things, but you don't have enough experience in that class to do all the cool things you think your character could do yet.
That's very interesting. I know I've played GURPS a couple of times, but I don't know that I ever got really all that into the mechanics of GURPS. But that's interesting. That's something that I'd like to kind of explore.
Cool. It's a cool-ass system.
Because of how modular it is, the same way when we ask ourselves as DMs, how would I want this campaign to be played for my players? And then depending on their characters, you are now building the scenario in which they're going through the process of, challenging their character aspects, and what better way to do that at what level. It's also another question to ask yourself of, okay, so I have some veteran people and some not, but I also want to empower the players enough to start taking a lot bolder actions and to even think about what they're doing. So maybe starting at level 1, even with inexperienced characters, giving them at least 1 or 2 levels might at least put them within the realm of knowing the mechanics of how to level up, but also give them enough tools to empower them and make them feel good about their character as well as they move forward, acquiring experience points, or if you go by milestones, which I know I have. Yeah, that's my take.
Okay. But I was next, yeah?
Yeah,
Yes.
I rolled a nat 1,
Right,
so yeah.
that's right, the nat 1. Yeah, it very much depends. I tend to think of it as more... As with most stuff for my games, I like to ask the players, to an extent, what they want to play at. As with most things in my campaigns, I like very much to ask the players what they're looking for in a game. So, starting at level 1, I find, just like Chris said, it's extremely good for like learning the entire system, for learning all of the mechanics, for feeling your way into what sort of character you want to play. And additionally, I think it's actually extremely important if you're playing in a campaign that is going to be really roleplay heavy. The more time you have with that character before they get all their wicked powers, the more time you have to develop who they are outside of that and to find a voice for the character and to figure out who they are in relation to you and things of that nature. Just figuring out who they are, So for the most part, my reasons for going with level 1 have already been stated here and there, with the addition of, like I said, the roleplay angle. Because Chris definitely nailed the biggest reason for it, with just learning how the system works with newbies. I have a counterpoint, but that can wait.
Right. Well, I'm not trying to cut you off or anything.
Yeah, by all means.
Is it my turn now? Okay. With starting at level 1, I completely agree that it works best with new players, because with new players, as veterans, we tend to forget about the little minutiae of the different mechanics of the system, whereas with new players, I mean, they're not just learning the leveling system, they're learning, what dice to roll. Sometimes they don't even know which one is the D20, which one is the D4, which one is the D8. They have to learn all of that. They have to learn how to read their character sheet. And once you start getting into higher levels, it just adds more and more things on top of it. Whereas if you start at level 1, it kind of gradually gets them ready to go on to a more complicated system. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Absolutely.
No,
It's like
definitely
math.
makes sense. I mean,
Yes,
exactly.
D&D
like
is nothing
math.
but math.
It's math with rocks you get to throw.
So statistical analysis,
A little bit.
Yes.
because I took that class, and let me tell you, I hated it. It was not good.
Not enough dragons.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to bring to the idea of a lower level.
I think Kyle brought up a really good point with the storytelling aspect, because starting everyone at a lower level also adds in the ability for the party to bond. So not only are your players learning how the mechanics work, but they can also learn how to make their abilities work in tandem with other players within their own party.
Definitely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure.
Like, you don't want to have, like, if you have 2 rogues in a party, you can have one who maybe at level 1 they start down like a charisma based path, whereas another one in the party starts down like straight up deceit and backstabby path.
Ah, yes.
And as they go along, they might decide they want to multi-class, and that could give them more of what they're looking for, and they won't necessarily know that if they start at a higher level, or they won't have as much of an opportunity to diversify.
Correct.
So levels can be considered like a big training exercise for your players, really. depending on where you start them at.
But you did have a point also, Steve, in it kind of depends on how you... Like, how... This might be... just put a pin in this. It'll be easier once we talk about higher levels, because it relates to everything. It's an overarching...
Alright, let's move on then to higher levels, so we can discuss the topic as a whole.
I got a lot to say on. I've got a lot to talk about on this one, but it's like none of it applies to just lower level starting, and I disagree with myself quite frequently. This is going to be fun. All right.
So when starting at other levels, I kind of feel like it's best for people who have definitely already played, or maybe someone wants to bring in a cool character that they already made to your campaign, and then you can just be like, yeah, so we're all starting at level 6 because cool guy over there already has a level 6 character that cool guy really, really wants to use, so let's all do that. Or maybe you want to be able to use super sweet monsters that you can't use in a campaign with a bunch of people who are levels 1 through 4.
Super sweet monsters is an incredibly good reason to do almost anything. As long as you get some super sweet monsters out of it. There's very little in this world I cannot justify.
Super Sweet Monsters is also my band name.
Just Super Sweet Monsters.
Rimshot.
Just add it right there.
Alright, Steve.
I just want my players to feel good, really. It just circles back to what I said before for the lower levels, but also for... I think it applies even more so for the higher levels. Even expanding off of that, you do want to have more experienced people to play these higher level characters. It does reflect how much knowledge they have already in the system itself. But, I mean, depending on where you start them anyway, they're going to go through the sessions. Each and every one of them is going to get them closer together as a group, regardless on where they start. But from my perspective, it's seeing the look on their face doing something really cool with a new ability they haven't gotten to use yet. And that's such a great feeling to have and to see happen, where they're like, oh, hey, I have this cool thing that I'm able to do right now for this very specific occasion. Because I know D&D has a lot of those, where you start off, like, everyone has similar stats or what have you, and as you go, you get different featured abilities from your class. Depending on what subclass you take, you can be a cleric that also is more of a martial archetype character, or just a warlock that kind of functions as a cleric. There's just so many ways that you can do it without even trying to step out of your class to even make it feel like the character that you want to have. And you can get those at the higher levels. But that's also the reason why I almost want to give people that small chance to know what that feels like. Because I know that on a player level, getting a new ability, I immediately want to figure out the most in character but very real way on why I would use that immediately.
If you've got a couple of people in there that have no idea if they even want to play it or not, you want to give them the fucking nukes. You want to give them something incredibly fun so that they will want to continue to play. It's like at the beginning of a video game when you have all the crazy powers and then they drop you back. And then you want to get those powers back, right? I want to get, for people who are like just getting into it, I want to get their fucking attention. I want them to know what it feels like to fireball 15 goblins so that they'll want that glorious, wonderful feeling back.
I can see the logic in that. That's actually pretty smart on a getting players hooked mentality, because...
Right, exactly.
Nothing really gets them hooked like, well, here's what it's like to fight a dragon.
Yep, that's exactly it. I want to throw them right into the coolest part of the game as quickly as possible so that they will want to come back for the rest of it, you know? And that's what brings me back around to when I was talking about just talking to the players and stuff like that. Because, like, you can find out, and you don't even have to ask them in D&D terms or anything like that. Just ask what parts of fantasy stuff they like and don't like, if you're doing a fantasy game anyway. You know, I find that the solution to a lot of this stuff is in direct communication with players, right? So, like, if you're talking to people who are definitely going to play, and you find out that they like this or that, then you can be pretty sure that they're going to hang on until that shit happens. But if you're talking to somebody who can take it or leave it, and they're like, oh man, I love Helm's Deep, throw them in a fucking battle. Like, give them what they want for that first taste. Now I sound like a drug dealer. I kind of am, I guess. But you know, you want to give them a black, and it again, it's a bad idea. It really is in a number of ways. You have to, as the DM, have to be really careful doing this, and you have to be really flexible on the rules because they're easy to pick up, but they're very hard to master. You know what I mean? So you got to be flexible on that kind of thing. And I would never do this in a game that I think has the potential to turn into a larger campaign or anything like that. But if we're just hanging out with a bunch of people who are, you know, like, yeah, I mean, I could try D&D, then screw it, why not, right? Like, let's everybody just have a blast for an evening or two.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. One of the reasons why I would want to start at a higher level, most of the reasons have been covered already, but like, some of the things that really interest me in D&D are the kind of the weird aspects of it. And you don't really start getting into the weirder enemies or the weirder type scenarios until you get into the higher levels, or like, you know, the higher level abilities, like magic abilities and stuff. Like if you wanted to, okay, for instance, I've had this idea for a campaign for a while that I would do this as a not a serious campaign. I would think more towards the tone of like a Wayne's World kind of tone. But it would be
I'm sorry. I apologize. I just cracked. I absolutely lost my shit laughing. I apologize. Of all the things I was expecting to come out of your mouth, Wayne's World was super not it. That was just absolutely not what I thought I was about to hear.
Were they, Brian?
Okay, no,
yeah.
Please continue. I apologize.
Yeah.
Please continue.
It makes sense.
No, I get it. I
makes
do.
Sense, I promise. The idea being that it would start at level 10, but every character mandatory has 5 levels of Bard, and then 5 levels of whatever else they want to be, and it would be like a kind of like a post-apocalyptic kind of scenario, but you're playing as a rock band at the end of the world.
See, that's dope. That's just straight up awesome.
You have no idea how high I could fly with that idea.
Shit.
So like I said, I mean, everybody has to multi-class. So like I said, it's 5 levels of Bard, but then 5 of anything else. But yeah, that's the idea. I mean, I haven't really ironed out any actual campaign plot points yet on that. It's just something that's been kind of kicking around in my head. But that's one that you would have to start at a higher level.
Because otherwise you can't do the 5 levels of Bard. Like, that's the conceit of the game, is that it has to be built that way. And that's very good. And that's that's a very good reason to do higher levels too, is if the concept that you have simply doesn't make sense any other way. Which, do you have more, Brian? Or, because if not, that actually brings me around to what I wanted to bring up.
No, I don't have any more on that thought. I think Chris was about to say something.
Oh,
sorry.
If she wants to say that before you go into your thing.
I was just gonna say, would you call that then a Bard class blitz?
Holy shit!
Yes.
Yep. Impossible.
Holy shit. I'm deeply impressed and upset.
That's the name of the campaign, right?
Yeah.
Holy hell.
That's official. That's official.
All right, so what that brings me around to, right, is this is going to sound okay. The very first thing that we really need to ask ourselves in determining this kind of thing is, what is a level? Which actually has a lot to do with what I think Steve was saying at the beginning, right? Which is, how do we define level 1? Like, what is it? Because level 1 leads to some issues, right? Like, for example, I'm playing in a campaign where I'm a paladin, and I have been a member of the, like, Knights Church thing for a while, right? So, how does one start at level 1 if they have been a member of this knightly order for a portion of their life. You can't have every character start being like 18 years old. So what you have to ask yourself is like, how do we define a level? Is it like in some cases it would have to match up to like portions of an actual organization you were in, depending on how that works, or like if you want to play an old man, right, who has been a bumbling wizard, how can you start at level 1?
Right, that makes sense. I mean,
Night school.
it could be that they've been studying their whole life and didn't really get the breakthrough until they
very much so. That works very well. But it's like it feels kind of like ass backwards to have to figure that out for every single character that somebody plays. And this is really just me spitballing and like trying to open up like, how the hell do we figure this out and justify it overall when choosing these kinds of things? Because there are a lot of different ways that it can be done. You know, like we could think about levels as that. You can think about levels as, I think this was what Steve was saying earlier specifically. Okay, like level 1, or level 0 rather, is what most people are. And most people's stats don't go more than 1 or 2 points above 10. Plenty go below, but not many go above. So if you think about it as basically once you hit level 1, you're already superhuman, is a way that you could look at it. So the levels start once you reach a point that is already beyond that of most people.
That makes sense, yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because as the DM, you have to judge what your players are able to take based on their level. And that comes into question with the other aspect of DMing that is only like a little covered, but it's still kind of muddy on the long run. Creature rating, or
challenge
rating.
Yeah, the challenge rating. Specific humanoid NPCs have challenge ratings. They don't have levels, but they're based on the levels of the character. So like if we expand that thought process on NPCs, enemy types for challenge ratings, especially bosses. If these are characters that live, breathe in this fictional world that we're building for our players, but we also would have to assume that the boss monster, enemy, or whatnot, it doesn't just sit in a cave the whole day. It does stuff, you know? Maybe it doesn't have a persona, unless that's you as a DM making that decision, which kudos to you, because that just makes that specific enemy cooler and unique. But we would have to assume that there is an unspoken level that enemy or NPC has. Because I do agree with you, Kyle. The commoner class, not many people are going to be beyond the 2 points of like, you know, stat level 10 for each block that they have. But depending on if that person is of importance to the story that you're making, then it would make a lot of sense that NPC is like maybe a level or 2 beyond the player characters, because that character or the aspect of levels also explains that much more experience that they have outside of adventuring. That would also explain when you are doing your calculation for challenge rating. That would also explain why the enemies are so tough and why the boss character is so tough. Because obviously these other entities have lives. They have... I'm not advocating that these characters have meaning or anything. I'm just saying, like,
and why not?
They do have a life outside of them just being the boss. Yeah. I mean, yeah, why not? But
I know some of the monsters and stuff in the handbooks and whatnot already have, like, a young version, an older version, or different sort of level-ish elements like that. I know for me, if there's a super cool monster I want to use and seems relevant to the environment, but my players aren't necessarily up to that challenge rating yet, I will alter that monster if it makes sense to. For instance, recently they encountered a rust monster, or whatever the fuck it's called. But I dialed some of its abilities down and made it so that instead of it being, you know, a fully grown adult monster, it was, like a juvenile monster. So it was easier. It was a smaller challenge rating for them, but I still kind of got to use this creature that I thought would be really cool in this instance.
Right. Just I know myself, I've done a similar thing where, I'll have a monster that I want to throw at somebody, but then looking at the stats, I've even taken a similar monster's stats that's lower challenge rating and kind of transposed it onto it.
Right. Yes.
And just took a couple of the things from the original monster to make it so that it's still a less powerful version of the same monster, but to make it easier, just if you're gonna throw a major demon at them, but they're not high enough for it, well, maybe you can find a minor demon that has similar enough stats, and you can, make that work.
See, this opens up a topic.
Mm-hmm.
This opens up a topic I can't wait to do a whole show on, which is reskinning shit. Because I think man, I could talk for hours about how great just reskinning stuff is. You can do so much, but that's a whole other thing. But we accidentally wandered into it.
Speaking of challenge rating, I don't know if I'm talking out of turn here, but speaking of challenge rating, what are your guys' opinions on, say you have a party of 4 people or whatever that are level 5. Would you only throw level 5 monsters at them, or are you going to assume that they're going to do more than what the book assumes they're going to be able to do, and throw maybe a level 7 monster at them? Something that's a little above their.
I assume you're thinking level 7 and whatever, in quotation marks, just whatever the challenge rating equivalent of that is.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just figured. I just wanted to clarify.
7.
Well, if my personal answer is that I have literally never once been correct about thinking that I put my players into a situation that was going to be difficult.
Yeah, like that time that Ryan glued the demon to the floor.
Yep, like the glue incident. I don't know. We'll talk about the glue incident some other time, because that's a whole fucking thing. But that is so many layers of me fucking up and him and him fucking me up. And anyway, my point is just, in my experience, and I don't think that I'm an easy DM. I think that I just cursed. Because it's always rolls that are the problem. So...
Oh yeah, you have, as you stated before, legendarily terrible rolls.
Oh my god,
it's whether you're behind the DM screen or in front of it.
Oh yeah, no, it's...
Player or not, your dice rolls seem to be cursed.
I defy all statistical logic. It is utterly insane how little I roll well and how much I roll poorly. And it is absolutely always going to be at the moment that I need I'd take a decent roll at the most, whether I'm in front of or behind the screen, as you say. If I need it, I ain't gonna get it. And if it's going to be funny, I'm going to fail. That's what it is. The universe has decided I'm the comic relief, whether I am running things or not. But so my point in all of that was that I find that it is probably better to send them... The way I see it is you throw stuff that's a little bit tougher than their level at them. Just a little, not like a lot, but a little bit. Because even if things start to go south, you can always just shave a couple of hit points off of there if you feel like it winds up being unfair. I'm not one to fudge a lot, but especially in early days during a campaign when you're not sure how these players are going to work at this level and how well they're working together and everything like that. I'd err on the side of being a little too challenging and then just edit that in the moment if you think that it's really unfair, if it went too far, I can't really think of a better way to...
And before you even go to fudging the dice, you could do things like, say the monster has a number of magical abilities that it could do, or it could do a claw attack. Well, maybe just do a claw attack when it would make more sense for the monster to do a big magical spell.
And I want to be clear...
But the claw attack is going to do less damage.
Under almost all circumstances, I try to play the monsters the way the monsters would play. But if everyone's just having a real shitty night, or if I overestimated their ability to kill something, I'll give them a little hand, because, you know, it all comes back to the fact, and this is going to come up every episode, I guarantee it. It all comes back to the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, it's my job to make sure you're having fun. And sometimes that does mean your character getting their ass kicked and dying. But most of the time it doesn't. So most of the time I'm gonna not go easy, but make sure that I give you every chance. You know? And if I overestimated your guys' ability, then that's on me, not you. So I'm not gonna let you get crushed. You know, it's just... And saying overestimated your ability sounds mean. More like overestimated your luck, your rolls. You know what I mean? Because that makes it sound like you turned out to be idiots as my players, or not you. When I'm saying you, I don't mean you. I mean you. It's the royal you. No, it's
that's a separate topic altogether.
By you, you're talking about the players in the game.
Yes,
you're
precisely.
Not necessarily talking about us.
Yes,
specifically.
of course. Yes, that's what I mean. My point is just, you know, that I am generally for. So to put it more succinctly, and without all of my stumbling and stuttering and whatnot, basically, I err on the side of challenge. Like, I'm going to assume that they're better than this, that they're better than their level would argue. But, you know, keep an eye on it in case I'm wrong.
Steve, do you have thoughts on this question?
I'm like, anything that would have been said, I mean, has already been said. I mean, because it's like, it's, at the end of the day, it all goes back to what you think is best for your players. Springing boarding off of Kyle there, you are there to just be like the architect, the intermediary between their interactions of this world that you have made for them and the effects of those decisions that they have made for themselves while in that level. I mean, and you can judge from wherever they decided to start at, or what level the campaign started at, or what level they are now, or what level of enemy types you wanted to throw at them. Like, that's a lot of math, and I hate math like so much. It's and like, don't get me wrong, I like 3.5 and Pathfinder, but that was so much math for whenever you leveled up. It was insane.
I would like to point out that you just popped this into my head all at once. 5th edition is actually much better at early levels than the other ones are. Like, it is actually much more enjoyable, and you do get a better feel for your character and for the class you're playing and stuff at an early level than you used to, which is good because, you know, want to make sure that the person is going to enjoy what they're playing, you know. Sorry, I didn't really mean it. I meant to say that earlier.
But that's exactly it, though. You want your players to enjoy the character that they made. You want them to enjoy the session and the other player characters. And, like, there's going to be some challenges against, you know, what they think is going to happen, the dice rolls, and obviously their level is going to affect that. But at the end of the day, as we talked in the episode before, you can kind of decide behind the DM screen what you want them to feel and see, like, last second. Like you pointed out, that you had to kind of scale back some of the abilities of a particular monster before sending it out to your players. And that's definitely one aspect. And the other time that we talked about, again, from the other episode, was, you know, don't make things so rigid enough where they could only have something happen. I'm like adjusting myself here because I'm in a laying down position, but don't yes, I'm using this as therapy. Fight me. Okay.
Podcaster in recline. My greatest masterpiece.
But using your DM screen is the best tool that you have to mitigate whatever oversight on your end and on their end, regardless on the level. But at the end of the day, I mean, you kind of just have to figure out what to do for whatever monster you want to throw at them. I personally use them because I'm terrible at making encounters. There is a website called Kobold Fight Club that I started using.
Yes.
It is...
Yes, it's a good site.
Now, and it gives you some suggestions based on level, difficulty, and experience. And you don't even have to take most of those suggestions. All you have to do is just take the CR values or similar types of enemies, and you can just throw in an enemy that you like in there, and you already have something fully formed that they're able to take. But you can go off the cuff and like add a few monsters here and there depending on like what they're able to go through. But again, because players are squishy, and that's why I like to have them, you know, a little bit more beefed up before I start throwing stuff that I actually want to see them fight.
Right. Yes. So here's a question. Or were you?
No, go ahead.
Oh, actually, Chris, did you have thoughts on that?
I didn't get to touch on that. I want to touch it.
Oh,
go ahead, touch it.
By all means.
So,
touch
it,
away.
please.
Yeah, challenge rating for me has been a difficult issue because traditionally the CR is based on a campaign of four players fighting a Chingadera. And the last couple campaigns I've run have been more than 4 people. So there's a delicate balance between challenge rating and what your players can actually do, where the initial thought might be to just do a higher challenge rating monster. For more players, it doesn't always work. So like if your players are at level 2 in 3.5, because that's what I play, they maybe don't have magical weapons or something yet. Something that would be usable on maybe a lower CR, like 4 or 5 monster, but they need to have a magic weapon to hit them, like if they're incorporeal or something. So for me, I end up doing a lot of let's have you fight multiple things at once.
Yes.
Oh, that's definitely a way to make it fun, but also if you kind of want to... If you want that party to die, then yeah, throw as much... Like, level 1 skeletons, like 1 or 2, yeah, that's nothing. But if you throw, like, 18 of them against, like, 4 level 4s, regardless, they'll die. Like, it's just gonna happen. Provided that there's no cleric on board.
That's actually another way to... If you start beginners at a higher level, you could throw, like... 30 kobolds at them, and just, you know, while any singular kobold wouldn't be a super hard fight, you have a mass of them, and that's when the actual challenge starts. And maybe if it starts getting too heavy-handed one way or the other, maybe some of them are cowards, and those kobolds decided to flee.
They have an appointment to get to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't know why I said it like that. This is not an ASMR podcast. I apologize.
Every podcast is an ASMR podcast.
Yeah, I think that's up to the listeners, Steve. So anyway, how do we feel about asymmetrical levels in campaigns? It's not something I've ever done or gotten to play in, but something about it sounds like it would be super fun. And also terrible. And I just wanted to know if anybody has had any experience with that, or if it's something that they would consider.
I think, if I could start out...
Yeah.
By all means.
I haven't necessarily played with people who have, like, drastic level differences. I personally hand out customized or tailored XP to incentivize my players to do certain things or participate more in the story element. So if they go through some dialogue and figure something out, you know, maybe they get an extra 30 XP or what have you. But I do think that people deciding to multi-class kind of creates an asymmetrical level campaign element when they start having fucking 10 levels in one thing, and then they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm gonna also be a druid at level 1.
Yeah, definitely to an extent, because if they're only getting the level... Because they're getting the level 1 stuff, then the other person is a level 1 character,
right,
and they are a level 10 character and a level 1 character, but not a level 11. Did I say level... You get what I mean. Yeah, that you're right. That very much does. In a way, anyway. It's like half an asymmetrical. It's an asymmetrical 0.5. It's yeah. Yes, it very much. I absolutely had not thought of it like that before. That's a really good point, and I have, of course, I have done that. I've played 3.5 with a lot. I'm multi-classing all over the goddamn place, so it's a good point.
On that subject for asymmetrical across the board for a particular campaign, I personally don't have experience, but I think you could at least moderate by a margin that everyone should stay within. So, like, for example, if the baseline is 5, then some people will be, like, either at a 2, some might be at a 7, and maybe one person's at a 5, but they're not... One person's not going to be at, like, 15, the other one's not going to be at, like, 2. So I think this is where statistical math would actually make things a little easier to, like, moderate, because then... You could also say, so your character's at this level, we can decide that it is this experience that your character has under your belt, and for other characters not having that experience, that's where you come in to adjust that as well.
It puts me in mind of Final Fantasy IV. Was it 4?
I think it has to be 4.
I think 4.
If I'm not mistaken.
The one with the twins and Tella, I think. I want to say that the levels in that game are asymmetrical. And that some characters show up at level 5 and others at, like, level 20 and stuff like that. It might not be 4. Might be 5? Shit, I don't know. There's fucking 15 of them. Anyway, it's one of the early ones. One of the lower numbers. And even just controls...
There's more than 15.
Say what?
There's more than 15.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you want to get...
No, we're not counting those.
That's a podcast in and of itself. Just like, we could spend an entire season of a podcast...
Final Fantasy
just
10-2, I'm looking at you.
Final Fantasy numbers. Like,
we don't talk about 10-2. I mean, I like 10-2 for my own reasons.
No, I talk about 10-2. We don't talk about 13. Okay, this is a whole other...
Tactic gets man.
This is a... I regret this. I regret my example.
Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy 13-2, or Lightning Return.
None of the 13s. I don't want them.
Where does Crystal Chronicles fit on this?
I don't even know. I give up. I don't know. Okay, look. I regret my decision to use that as an example. But it is a game that is... Which effectively, the original Final Fantasies especially, were basically just one-player D&D. And, you know, so it's kind of like the same thing. It's a similar thing in a microcosm. And in that game, I found it to be very interesting and honestly extremely cool, because that makes it so that the levels more or less actually do represent the experience of the person and the power level of the person. And I think that there could be something fun in that. I really wish that one of us had more experience with this. Maybe I'll have to make it happen.
Well, I have a point on this that I haven't done it myself, but there was a particular one of the D&D actual play shows. I won't go into too many specifics because I don't want to spoil anything for if somebody wants to watch it or whatever. But there were a couple of characters in the campaign that started off lower than other players, and the way that, if I understood it correctly, because they didn't necessarily tell you exactly what character or what level the characters were at every episode, but the way that, as I understood it, that they handled that was at the start of the game, say these two characters are level 1 and these other characters are level 5. Well, when the regular characters level up, the ones that are on level 1 level to 2 levels. And then the next time they would also level 2 levels until eventually it evened out, and then they could all level 1 level again. That might be a way to kind of explain why, or as a reason to explain why they might level 2 levels, is if they are all of a sudden adventuring with somebody that has a much higher level, well, they're going to get more experience compared to other people that are at their current level.
They have like a mentor.
Right. Yeah, right. So it's like when you take your shitty Pokemon out with the EXP share. I'm sorry, I keep video gaming. That's intentional, I swear it.
How many Pokemon games are there?
Don't even. I cannot even. There are at least 13 that claim to be the first one in some way or another. So it's... Anyway. I was going to suggest something like that, actually, like staggering EXP amounts so that you can get them closer to the same level. So you can start them out at different levels as story demands, and then bring them to get, like, that's a good way to handle it, Ink. I think it all comes back to what I was asking before, which is how do we define level, you know? For me, I think I like to do it the Steve way, with it's the minute that they start being exceptional, they start leveling up, so to speak. But I think there's a lot to be said about doing it other ways too. Like, there are a lot of different ways to handle this.
And that makes sense too when you think about it on a logical level, because like you might have an NPC who is a soldier or a guard or something, but they're not a fighter or they're not a barbarian,
right?
You know, they haven't gone to that, for lack of a better term, superhuman level.
Right.
They might be an experienced soldier, but they're not even a level 1 fighter.
Right, yes, of course, because the class is with the exception of, like, if you're in a guild of some kind, classes are in reality, they are extremely abstract. Most people that play, myself included, especially if it's a more lighthearted game, like to directly reference classes and stuff like that as if they are like a definable thing, you know? Because it's fun. It's really fun to do that. But in actuality, especially in a more story-driven, more realistic, like less wacky sort of game, they really are very abstract unless you are specifically like you can be a bard and not be a bard. You can be the class bard and not be a professional musician of any kind.
I know we're covering all these subjects, but is it worth also at least a small caveat of sometimes as the player, you can give them the option when they level up into whatever subclass, just to give them more of an incentive and to make them feel more comfortable with their character. Feats are also by level, depending on if they want to upgrade a specific stat or take a feat. And then on that subject of what Kyle was saying, you can be a bard, but you don't have to be a bard. And as a player, I aim to make those kinds of characters because I like breaking the system. But that's honestly just me. But there are ways to make other classes exist with other classes without being the traditional class that you started out with. I know feats is one way, and then when you said that reminded me of when a person is making their character in the starting character thing for whatever level, they usually have to pick a background unless they, create a background for themselves, which is completely also a good way to go. But that just reminded me of the entertainer background. So you can be a bard, have an entertainer background, but then take a fighter class, but have the entertainer background. Because that would make a lot more sense if you don't want a multi-class, but you still want to have that flavor as a level 1 character.
Yeah, that does make sense. That brings a little bit of complexity to a level that doesn't usually have all that much complexity to it. Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good way to look at it.
I mean, I know that's like scratching the surface of what could be spoken about, which I'm sure that's a different topic that we can get into altogether, like character creation. But on the whole, it's at least worth mentioning that when you level up as these characters, these are tools available for you as these characters from the DM to make your character unique within the level that you're in.
So, any other thoughts, questions, points of discussion?
Do we want to maybe call it and go into goofs?
We can do that.
All right, we can go in order. If right now we're doing goofs.
Yeah, so let's roll this out if we have preferably level or leveling based goofs. Mine is not so much a funny one as I'm a fucking dumbass. So, due to late quarantine, we've been playing online. We have, our Discord channel, we got Roll20, all that stuff going on, and we have a text chain, right? So, in this text chain, one of my players asked, did we level up? And another player responded with a GIF that seemed to be this little marshmallow and or burrito doing a little fist bump with like a yeah sort of emoji thing going on, and I saw this and was like, yeah, I guess everyone leveled up their character before our next session, then sitting there talking with all of them. Turns out they're not close to being the next level, like, at all. Like, they were level 2, they leveled up to level 3, and because I wasn't actually keeping track of anyone's XP, they were, like, way far away from level 3. So, they got to level up early.
Yeah. That's precisely why I mean, again, that's a different subject altogether, but I think that's why I like milestones over experience. There's a lot of things attached to that, but I want to make it easy for everyone as much as possible. I also don't want to do math, so you're just going to level up when I tell you I think it's thematically and story-driven reason that you leveled up.
Nothing wrong with milestone.
Agreed.
They're both very valid ways of doing it. They're both approaches that would make sense to you, the DM. I don't necessarily have any level goofs. I know I do. For me personally, if we're going off of like leveling and then multi-classing, in the campaign that I am currently in, that Brian is my very generous DM, he mentioned to start us out at, what was it, like level 3? Something like that?
3. Yep, 3.
So I took 1 level of cleric and 2 levels of warlock, which does put me at the asymmetrical disadvantage that we talked about. But it gave me a lot more options of what I'm able to do as a caster. Not necessarily the ability to fly, because that was race equivalent, but it does allow me as a cleric to have a packed slot ready and available on a short rest for a cleric spell. That's not necessarily a goof as much as an exploit, really.
Mm-hmm.
Also, being a cleric that has...
What you got there is a speedrun strat.
Yeah, either that or just kind of like being a cleric with an Eldritch Blast just kind of rocks.
I don't have a level goof so much as I have another aspect of my curse, which is that everybody's got an ability or something that they are like raring to get to, that they just like cannot fucking wait to get their hands on, to use. All I wanted in the world in this 3-5 campaign was to be an archmage so that I could use all those wonderful, wonderful spell-shaping toys that they can get their hands on. And the session that I finally fulfilled the final requirement to complete that thing, I was immediately killed, and I got killed so hard that the campaign died. And that's a whole other story. That's not a story I can tell in a Goofs thing. It's a big, long, sprawling tale. But that happened. It has happened with other games I've played in. I just never get to use the thing I want, and it's always at the last possible second that the thing goes away.
I mean, I hear you.
Yeah. Well, in terms of leveling goof, mine, kind of like Chris's, is more that I'm a fucking dumbass.
Because
admitting it is the first step.
hey, if your goof is that you let Steve do his goof, I don't think that counts.
Damn it, now I gotta think of another. No. I was running a campaign, and it was with some first-time players, and this was probably the second session that we did. And the characters were all still level 1. Well, I'm running this combat where I had like 2 or 3 kobolds or something, and I was running it out of the pre-made campaign Tyranny of Dragons. The first part of that, I forget the name of it, because Tyranny of Dragons is 2 different parts to it. It was the first part of that. Anyway, so they're fighting these kobolds, and they are just beating these kobolds' asses, and I'm just like, what the hell? Why is this so easy for them? And, like, after they had killed, like, 4 or 5, I realized that while I was focusing on making sure that everybody was going at the right times, explaining how initiative worked for these new players, I was forgetting to go and actually attack as the kobolds. So it was basically just the kobolds were standing there getting murdered.
Yeah, that should have been a lot more
Sacrificial
difficult
kobolds.
for them. I mean, is there any other kobold than a
At
sacrificial
that point, you
kobold?
just gotta lean into it and
Running
start
away.
having them, like, hurl themselves at the blades and just be like, you found a weird death cult.
I mean, like, to be fair, as I said, they were level 1 characters. They were brand new players, and they didn't actually notice that I made this mistake. And I didn't necessarily tell them that I made that mistake.
Excellent.
But they just got to feel like they were awesome for a while.
Very good.
It's all about experience, Brian, and you gave them that experience.
Exactly.
Thank you for sitting in on this session. You've gained 200 experience points. Rolling Into Your DMs was produced by Steve and Brian, written by Kyle and Chris, and created by Steve, Brian, Kyle, and Chris, with the help of a handful of dice. You can find us on Twitter at Rolling Into Your DMs. That's rolling in the number 2 UR DMs. Or on Instagram at Rolling Into Your DMs. Join us next time, and don't forget your character sheet.